Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching How Did Christianity Become the Most Popular Religion on Earth by Epic History. Now this is a fascinating topic and it's a bit different from Epic History's usual videos. They're typically more focused on one particular historical event or say a particular time period, whereas this is going to be a much more general video. But some really interesting stuff. I'm excited to get into it. Before I do, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave a like on the video, subscribe to my channel, and check out my Patreon, which is linked down below. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's jump right into this reaction.
Christianity, the most practiced religion on earth, began with the life of Jesus Christ, a Jew who lived in the Roman province of Judea.
Yeah, as with a lot of our videos, it all goes back to Rome.
His resurrection and divinity are matters of faith, but his existence and death by crucifixion around 30 AD are widely accepted as historical fact. Christianity's early spread is credited to a small group of loyal followers, the Apostles. They are joined around 36 AD by Paul, who has a vision of Christ while traveling to Damascus. Paul makes it his life's mission to spread the gospel, or good news, of Christ's death and resurrection. He is extremely successful, winning Christian converts around the Mediterranean and as far west as Italy. According to tradition, the Apostle Mark establishes a church in Alexandria around 42 AD.
Right, so we're talking about the very early days of Christianity, when of course it was still a very underground religion, and really as Christianity grew, it would become more and more oppressed, right? It would face active repression from the Roman state, who saw it as a sort of threat to more classic, traditional Roman religious practices. At the moment, it doesn't quite face a massive amount of repression, but that's going to pick up pretty quickly as Christianity becomes a bit more known around the Roman Empire. We see the beginnings here in the Eastern Mediterranean. Of course, eventually, this sort of region of the world, if we're talking especially about the Balkans, modern-day Greece, the Byzantine Empire, will become the site of Orthodox Christianity, whereas the West will be Catholicism. But we still have a long way to go from there. This is the very founding point of the Christian faith.
The origin of today's Coptic Orthodox Church. Also, according to tradition, in 52 AD, Thomas the Apostle arrives in India and establishes several small Christian communities.
Wow.
Most historians dispute this due to lack of evidence.
Right, and of course, what we have here, especially with early Christian history, is you're going to have some claims and some things that are maybe believed on the basis of faith that cannot necessarily be backed up by historical evidence. So there's a bit of an interplay there where you have to try and work out what exactly is accurate, what might have happened, and what definitely did not happen. But that's often the case with different religions, right? They have their own faith-based claims. We got to try and make that work with the history.
Early missionaries such as Paul successfully spread Christianity across the Roman Empire in the 1st century AD. Christian communities are documented from North Africa to Italy. By 100 AD, the 4 Gospels that make up the Bible's New Testament are complete. They form the foundation of Christianity to the present day. Christianity continues to spread in the Roman Empire.
Well, we are moving pretty fast. I'll point out, as we move through the years, you will see more and more active repression of the Christians, though there was some repression from really early on, right? What we see is initially Christianity spreads very quickly among the underclasses of the Roman Empire, among freedmen, slaves, those who were really at the bottom of the social hierarchy, right? It was a religion that really appealed to those kinds of people, and you can imagine why the story of Jesus and Christianity would appeal to those at the bottom of the social hierarchy. That is where the religion really flourished in these early times. But even as you move, because we're moving pretty quickly, into the mid 200s, into the 300s, the religion will become a lot more widely popular. It will spread from its initial base among those groups at the bottom of the social hierarchy to people who have more influence, more money, which of course will then spread the religion further as those with influence take it up.
And among its neighbours. Around 301, Armenian king Tiridates III converts to Christianity and proclaims it the state religion,
Wow.
making Armenia the world's oldest Christian country.
How about that? I mean, it's really fascinating to see some regions and countries that are so early to Christianity and still stuck with it. Armenia, and I'm sure we'll talk about Ethiopia at one point. And of course, this is also a moment, in fact, exactly around this time period, or right before this moment, when Diocletian in the Roman Empire and his allies are setting off the biggest of the Christian persecutions, right? There were a bunch of different persecutions against the Christians in the Roman Empire. They tended to be a little more piecemeal. Diocletian inflicts this really mass-scale persecution that is the worst of the persecutions. But then, of course, after this point, Christianity is becoming more and more accepted, not just in Armenia, but in Rome itself.
Christians face persecution across the Roman Empire, where it is emperors who are considered divine. But in 312, according to Christian chroniclers, Roman Emperor Constantine experiences a Christian vision just before the Battle of Milvian Bridge.
It's a very famous moment in Roman history. First, Constantine will become the first Christian Roman emperor. Now, there's, a lot of questions about how Christian he actually was, right? How devoted was he to Christianity versus to other more traditional Roman practices? Because, they were not always mutually exclusive for people. I know that might sound strange today, but as Christianity spread, especially at these early points, people could sometimes hold Christianity along with other religious beliefs. Now, however much of a Christian Constantine was, he is widely recognized and was the first Christian Roman emperor, which ushers in this new era for Christianity in Rome when it is a lot more accepted than it was previously.
The following year, he passes the Edict of Milan, legalizing Christianity across the Roman Empire.
Yeah, and this is your first really official toleration, right? This is an end to those persecutions of the past. Now, I think some people think this is the moment when the empire officially becomes Christian. It is not, right? This did not make Christianity the official religion of the empire, but it legalizes it. It essentially allows for toleration, and especially when the empire is Christian, that means that he does favor Christianity, and it will continue to grow and become more popular and powerful.
In 325, he convenes the Council of Nicaea, the first of many formal church gatherings aimed at resolving theological disputes. An estimated 300 bishops attend the council.
And this is really the beginning of the sort of state involvement with Christianity, right? Now, of course, as with every type of belief or ideology, there had always been some politics involved. That's just how things work. But in this moment, you have essentially the emperor, and the emperor has a relatively light touch, but you see a direct relationship here between the Roman Empire, the emperor, and with Christian religion, faith, right? With how exactly it should be practiced, what should be believed, what should the doctrine of the religion be, and that's going to be a relationship that we'll maintain, right? Of course, with the Eastern Roman Empire, the emperor, and with the church, of course, eventually the Orthodox Church, and then in the West, eventually, it'll be the Holy Roman Emperor and the Catholic Church. But you'll see a relationship starting here between the state and the church that will remain.
Evidence of Christianity's early growth and organization. The council establishes the Nicene Creed, a statement of Christian faith still used today.
Although they established that, but that did not mean that all Christians in the empire accepted it. In fact, it was quite the opposite. Even though it was established at the council, A lot of people still did not abide by the Nicene Creed, all right? So just remember, when we talk about these councils, we say this council did this council established that. Well, there were a lot of Christians at this point throughout the empire, and they were doing their own things. You know what I mean? Orthodox, and I don't mean Orthodox Christianity, but I mean sort of religious orthodoxy, was not held to that closely among a lot of Christians during this time period.
Nevertheless, Christianity is fragmented.
Yes.
And numerous sects and doctrines flourish.
Mm-hmm.
Most disputes center on the precise nature of Christ and his relationship to God and the Trinity.
Mm-hmm. Age of Saints. Great music.
Around 330, Christianity spreads south into Africa. King
Hey.
Ezana declares Christianity the official religion of Aksum.
Aksum, which is what we talk about when we talk about Ethiopia, right? So they're they're early to Christianity.
Horn of Africa. This is the origin of today's Ethiopian church, one of the oldest in the world. In 380, Emperor Theodosius passes the first Roman law to define Orthodox Christian belief. Christianity is on its way to becoming the state religion of the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
Across its territory, Christians attack old temples, destroying some and turning others into churches.
And we see this societal change over time, right? Where we go from old pagan religions to Christianity. And so as the change happens, old temples are destroyed, converted into churches. We'll see around Eastern Rome, eventually when the Ottoman Empire takes over, and even Muslim states taking over the Middle East and Anatolia before then, the same thing will happen, right? Well, you'll see churches that are then turned into mosques, right? So it's just this change that happens over time. I always prefer people to convert buildings rather than destroy them. You got a beautiful old temple. Hey, don't destroy it. Just convert it into a church, you know what I mean? I'd rather, as a historian, I'd rather you keep the history, right?
Later emperors outlaw worship of the old gods and persecute their followers, who become known as pagans.
Yes.
A derogatory term for those who are backward and inferior.
Yeah, see, even there, and the term is stuck, right? I just used the term pagan a moment ago, right? So that derogatory term is very much stuck over time, even though I do not mean it in a derogatory manner.
The so-called barbarian tribes that overrun much of the Western Roman Empire, Visigoths, Ostrogoths, and Vandals, also convert to Christianity.
And this is when we begin to see another trend that will persist, which is sort of the diplomatic and political power of Christianity, right? In a relatively short period of time, Christianity has gone from a religion that was persecuted by the state to now it is the state religion, and it's being used as a political tool for a lot of these foreign tribes that Rome is interacting with. We'll see this with Rome, we'll see this with the remaining Eastern Roman Empire, right? Christianity, in conversion to Christianity, becomes a diplomatic tool for both Christian and non-Christian states.
Even if initially they adopt the heretical beliefs of Arianism. Around 405, St. Jerome completes a new Latin translation of the Bible, which becomes known as the Vulgate. It will become the official Bible text of the Catholic Church, and remains the basis of the Catholic Bible to this day. Over the next 2 centuries, missionaries at great personal risk strive to convert pagan communities and their rulers. The conversion of an influential ruler proves a crucial strategy, often leading to the conversion of entire realms.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much of an idea of sort of modern religious toleration. Although I'll point out, the Roman Empire before Christianity was actually quite a tolerant empire, as in when they expanded and took in new people, you could largely continue to practice your traditional religion. That's not the case any longer. The empire's become Christian, they've become a lot less tolerant. And that's the case for a lot of people throughout the world. And so one of the things that happens is if you manage to convert the leader or the ruler of a kingdom or tribe, there's a good chance that that leader will take their people along with them, right? Each particular people or tribe or state or whatever tend to have one sort of binding religion.
Christianity spreads throughout Western Europe, even as the Western Roman Empire falls. Around 432, St. Patrick travels to Ireland to begin the conversion of the Irish. In 508, Clovis, king of the Franks, converts, completing the conversion of Gaul. In 563, Columba travels from Ireland to western Scotland, establishing a monastery on the island of Iona, one of the oldest in Western Europe.
Yeah, and we're seeing here some of the really heartlands of Christianity or Catholicism, if you're talking about France or Ireland, beginning to first be converted. And you can see some interesting things here where when you look at Scotland, now Scotland today is mostly a Presbyterian country, or probably a lot of people are atheists as well. And that transition happens over, the last couple hundred of years with the Reformation, the Church of Scotland, all that type of stuff. But one of the regions that really holds out and there are still Catholics in Scotland today, right? Obviously. One of the regions that really holds out are the Highlands. You see a lot more Catholics in the Highlands. They hold out for a much longer time. This is part of a political thing with the Jacobites and all that sort of stuff. I mean, there's a lot to it, but I'll just point out, that is where, in large part, Christianity is first arriving and is based, in the Highlands right there, and they stick with it the longest. Or at least they stick with Catholicism the longest, I should say. It gets complicated when we have all these different splits as the rest of Scotland converts to Presbyterianism.
In 589, Visigoth king Recared renounces Arianism and converts his entire kingdom to Catholicism. In 597, Pope Gregory sends St. Augustine to Britain. He converts King Ethelbert of Kent, beginning the conversion of the English.
Age of Holy War. Uh-oh.
In 635, Alopen becomes the first known Christian missionary to reach China.
Wow.
Emperor Taizong of the Tang dynasty issues an edict allowing Christianity to spread. Missionaries build churches and translate Christian texts into Chinese. Christian theology mixes with existing traditions, adopting Taoist and Buddhist terminology.
And of course, it's not like Christianity is going to become the main religion of China, right? Or even incredibly popular, but you will have a minority community of Christians there that will persist into the modern era.
Meanwhile, Arab forces, proclaiming the new faith of Islam, conquer much of the Middle East and North Africa, and seize control of Christianity's most holy sites in Jerusalem.
Which is, of course, if you're a believing Christian, a pretty big strike, or at least people at that time saw it as a strike against their faith. As in, the sort of holy land of Christianity, well, the holy land of all three Abrahamic religions, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. But if you view it from a Christian perspective at that time, your holy land has just been taken. For a lot of people, that caused a lot of soul searching. They felt, well, why has this happened? Have we been bad Christians? What is going on here? And of course, this starts the multi-century effort to retake the Holy Land.
By 720, Muslim conquests extend as far as the Iberian Peninsula. However, most Islamic rulers tolerate Christianity in their lands, and though treated as second-class subjects, Christian communities endure.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, obviously it depends where you look, right? At this point, it's Abbasid Caliphate. Different Muslim states will handle Christians differently. But there is a general trend, which is in Christian states, they tended to be a lot less tolerant, especially, say, with something like Reconquista in Spain. You see a lot of the Jews and Muslims kicked out or killed. Whereas in these Muslim states, there tended to be a bit more toleration because oftentimes these Islamic states had a view of the people of the book, right? The Abrahamic religions, the Christians, the Jews, and the Muslims. And though the Christians and the Jews were second class citizens, they were still better than pagans, right? That's how a lot of Muslims viewed it. And so, Christians and Jews would be allowed to remain and practice their religions, right? There were obviously attempts at conversion over time, depending on where you look, but there tended to be more toleration of these Abrahamic religions and allowing them to continue to practice in their communities.
Medieval Europe has by now splintered into many kingdoms. Frankish King Charlemagne extends his rule across Francia, Bavaria, Saxony, and northern Spain. Wherever he conquers, he converts new subjects to Christianity, often at the point of a sword.
Yeah.
In 800, he is crowned Holy Roman Emperor by the Pope, the first in an imperial line that lasts 1,000 years.
Yeah, and this is where we see, of course, out in the East, the Eastern Roman Empire, the Patriarch, right? These sort of Christian institutions have held strong. Out in the West, it's been a difficult couple hundred years, right? The church has remained, and it has been a powerful institution, but it has been weakened, and there has been really no central state Christian authority. Well, that's just changed. You've got the Holy Roman Empire. You've got the Catholic Church, or the Church in the West, you could say at this point. Now, there's going to be interplay over the years, right? Where sometimes the Pope will dominate the empire, sometimes the Emperor will dominate the Pope. But what this means is you do have this central Christian authority in the West, just sort of ushering us into this new era of Western Christianity.
Christianity continues to spread north and east, with the help of more royal conversions. In 965, King Harold Bluetooth of Denmark, followed by Duke Mieszko and Poland's leading nobility.
And of course, you see all this territory turning yellow at once, but, as with all historical changes, we need to recognize this happened piecemeal and over time, right? And what the map doesn't necessarily communicate, and this is always the case with maps, they always have to simplify. But in these territories where you have your duke or your king convert, there were still a lot of non-Christians remaining, and the sort of process of converting them would take sometimes decades, sometimes even hundreds of years. Non-Christian communities would remain, right? So just because your king converts, yes, he will take the whole country with him officially, as I was saying earlier, but it doesn't mean that everybody in your kingdom or your state will necessarily convert. And once again, it's piecemeal in that, even though they may adopt some Christian practices or they may adopt the label of Christian, they will still hold on to some of their traditional pagan practices, right? So just keep that in mind as we're seeing this map evolve over time.
Vladimir the Great, Grand Prince of Kiev, regarded as the founder of Christianity in Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah.
King Olaf Tryggvason of Norway, who sends missionaries to Iceland and Greenland.
Wow.
King Stephen of Hungary.
And of course, once again, especially now that there are such powerful Christian states, it's just as much an act of faith as an act of policy, right? It's political. That was even less the case back with those old tribes that converted, but now, there are powerful centers of Christian authority, whether in the West or the East, and that is what leads to a lot of these conversions. And especially as you see the split between the West and the East, you'll see, of course, some people, even if you don't want to say Catholic or Orthodox, you'll see even at this point, some of these states in sort of Eastern Europe and the Balkans, when they convert, they're taking a lot more from Constantinople, right? The culture, the art, the different practices, things like that, the religion. And of course, in the West, they're taking more from Rome, the Catholic Church, right? The Holy Roman Emperor, things like that.
And King Olaf Hurtkunen of Sweden, whose attempt to convert pagans meets fierce resistance. In 1054, tensions between the Greek Eastern Church headed by the Patriarch in Constantinople, and the Latin Western Church, ruled by the Pope in Rome, lead to a split known as the Great Schism.
And this is why, though the split hadn't happened yet, I've been talking about the split between East and West, because even before it was official, there was great tension. There was already difference between the East and the West, even if it was not made official. Well, now it is official.
The result is the formation of the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church. The Eastern Roman, or Byzantine, Empire is hard-pressed by the Seljuk Turks.
Yeah.
And so in 1095, Pope Urban II calls for a crusade to aid the Byzantine Empire and reclaim the Holy Land.
Right, and this all begins from the Byzantines, the Eastern Romans, despite the split. And of course, there'd been tension for a long time, like hundreds of years. The split had just occurred a few decades ago. A lot of people at this moment still believed that the split could be overcome, right? This was not a permanent split between East and West. Now, they were wrong, but you can see how they might not know that in the moment. And so this starts the First Crusade with the Byzantines calling out for help. They're saying, hey, all our territory's being taken. Now, are they really that interested in reconquering the Holy Land for Christianity? Or do they want to reconquer some of their territory in Anatolia to rebuild their state? I'd say probably the latter. But the language used is one of religion, right? Because they want to convince these Catholics in the West, the Latins, to come and help them. And so the First Crusade begins, the first of many. Probably the most successful crusade as well, this first one.
Christians. He promises forgiveness of sins to those who take part, and Catholic Christians sign up in droves.
And this was such a major moment just in sort of history, in European Mediterranean history, in that since the fall of the Roman Empire, or the empire in the West, because of course the East remained, but there had been a real breakdown in central authority. All these different successor states had popped up. This, in many ways, is really the first time you're getting everybody back together, right? The sort of authority of the Pope across all these different countries allows Christians from a bunch of different states to gather together and form this fighting force in a way that no individual state could manage to do, right? So it's a big moment.
The success of the First Crusade leads to the establishment of several Christian states in the Levant. But within 200 years, all have fallen to Muslim neighbors.
Yeah, I talked about the multi-century struggle to reconquer the Holy Land. In the moment, I'm sure a lot of Christians thought, we've done it. We've reconquered the Holy Land. That's it. Well, no. It only lasted for, in the grand scheme, a relatively short period of time. Of course, in the moment, that's a pretty long period of time. But eventually, these states will fall again.
Christian rulers have more success in Iberia, rolling back the Muslim conquests of the 8th century. In Northern Europe, there are crusades against pagans in the Baltic and Finland. Meanwhile, Christianity continues to gain influence in the East. Papal legate John of Montecorvino crosses Armenia, Persia, and India to reach.
And of course, we've seen a lot of expansion in Europe so far, right? And that's really been where the vast majority of the expansion has been. But of course, there's expansion outside of Europe. And as we move into these following centuries, there's going to be global expansion of Christianity like you've never seen before.
China, where in 1294 he becomes the first bishop of what will become Beijing.
Wow.
In 1386, Grand Duke Jogaila, the last pagan ruler of Lithuania, is baptized and begins converting his subjects. In 1453, the Ottoman Turks capture Constantinople, the center of the Eastern Orthodox Church. Constantinople had been considered the new Rome. With its fall, the Russian Orthodox Church claims Moscow as the third Rome.
Yeah, Moscow sort of jumps in there. you know, you've got the first Rome, which is Rome. Of course, as the West falls, Rome sort of falls as well. It was, even at that point, not very important. And so, at least in term practically important, there's still some symbolic importance. And then Constantinople becomes the second Rome, and it really earns that title. Well, now it has fallen, right? And it was the center of Orthodox Christianity. And so Moscow claims that title of the Third Rome, which is really less to do with Rome. Honestly, they could have claimed the title of the Second Constantinople, because what Moscow is claiming is really to be the new center of Eastern Orthodox Christianity. And that is sort of what happens. I mean, it was never as concentrated in Moscow as it was in Constantinople, right? Constantinople was truly the center of Eastern Orthodox Christianity, religiously, culturally, artistically, etc., etc., etc. With the decline of the Byzantine Empire and the fall of Constantinople, the Orthodox religion will be more splintered than it was before, but Moscow is, the number one claimant to that title to be the center of Orthodox Christianity, but is definitely not as strong as Constantinople was.
With a duty to protect all Orthodox Christians.
Here we go. Age of Discovery. Big moment for Christianity.
The Age of Discovery, marked by great pioneering maritime voyages, will see Western European powers carry Christianity to many far-off lands.
Yeah, and, if you want to look at sort of a competition between Christianity and Islam, which I'm not sure is really useful to look at it that way, but, in this moment, prior to the age of exploration, what you have is essentially a Christian Europe. And of course, there's Christianity in some places elsewhere, right? In Aksum, Ethiopia, there's still Christians throughout the Middle East. Even outside of this general area, there have been expansion. But largely, the sort of center of Christianity is in Europe. Islam, the center sort of in the Middle East. At this point, the Ottoman Empire is the strongest Muslim state. And they've conquered Anatolia and some of southeastern Europe, right? So you've really got, if you think about this through the lens of Clash of Civilizations, which once again I'm not sure is really useful, you've really got a sort of Christian world and a Muslim world right up against each other. You know what I mean? This is the moment where Christianity is really going to massively expand outside of that, right? Of course, when you sort of, you don't discover it, but you happen upon this whole new hemisphere of the world, that represents an opportunity for a lot of missionary work and settlement for the Christians.
In 1482, a Portuguese caravel reaches the Kingdom of Congo.
Right, and of course, the continued, and at this point, really ramping up expansion of Christianity throughout Africa. We saw the map of Europe slowly fill in as the last of these pagan states converted, and now the expansion begins outside of Europe.
9 years later, its ruler, Zingakuwu, converts to Christianity, along with many of his nobles. The king later abandons his Catholic faith, but Christianity remains Congo's state religion. In 1492, Catholic monarchs defeat the last remaining Islamic rulers in Spain, in the Emirate of Granada. The Christian reconquest of Iberia, the Reconquista, is complete.
Right, and even after it's sort of been militarily conquered, then you see a lot of Muslim and Jewish civilians being pushed out, right, pretty violently. And of course, a lot of them flee. And in fact, a lot of those, we talked about toleration earlier, a lot of those Sephardim Jews, right, so Jews from the Iberian Peninsula, where do they go? They go to the Ottoman Empire. It's one of the few places that will take them in, right? Once again, the Ottomans, if you're Christian or Jewish, you are second class compared to the Muslims, but you are allowed to live in relative peace, prosperity, and toleration. You're allowed to keep your religion. So a lot of these Jews who are not allowed to keep their religion in Spain, they flee. They go to the Ottoman Empire.
That same year, Christopher Columbus reaches the Americas. It is a moment of profound significance for the spread of Christianity.
Yes.
Further transatlantic voyages by Europeans will pave the way for colonization and conversion of this new world.
Oh, yeah. And so we see Christian expansion, of course, into Africa, beyond Africa, to the east, throughout Asia, especially in the Americas. This is going to be their big win in terms of missionary work, right? I mean, it's almost, if not sort of entirely, exclusively Christian expansion and missionary work done throughout the Americas, right? Now, we will see also more Muslim expansion over time particularly into Africa, North Africa in particular, and throughout Asia. That's where we'll see a lot of Muslim expansion, especially as the centuries continue. But this is a massive, massive moment for Christian expansion and Christian missionary work.
In 1493,
And really, I mean, it's both in terms of conversion, right? As in, of course, most of the indigenous people die. Those that don't, a fair amount of them convert. Not all, right? But a fair amount, especially if you're talking about the Spanish Empire or the Portuguese. You do have a lot of conversion there. But also, equally or maybe more important, is the settlement of Christians out in the Western Hemisphere. So you've got this, European Christian population that is now populating the Americas as the indigenous people are either pushed out, killed, or die from disease.
Pope Alexander VI issues a papal bull granting Spain the right to claim newly discovered lands in South America. The bull urges that the Christian religion be exalted and be everywhere increased and spread, and that barbarous nations be overthrown and brought to the faith itself. The following year, in the Treaty of Tordesillas, Spain and Portugal agreed to divide the New World between them.
Yeah, Tordesillas, Spain, and Portugal are like, you know what? What if we just split up the world? I mean, it's crazy, man. It shows you the power of these two Atlantic empires in that moment, right? Of course, we know in the end, other empires will become more powerful. But in this moment, it is the seafaring Atlantic empires, Spain and Portugal. Portugal's more trading empire. These two that really, they get the jump and they gain the power. And so they're able to, not that people would acknowledge this for until the end of time. Of course they didn't. But it really shows you that Spain and Portugal, they're the big dogs here, right? They're able to claim a lot of this territory just between them two.
Drawing a line on the map, Spain will get everything to the west, Portugal everything to the east. And wherever Spanish and Portuguese expeditions tread, Christian missionaries follow.
Yeah, I think they always say that the conquistadors who conquered this territory, they were going for God, glory, and gold, right? Now, you could argue which of these was weighed the heaviest. I'd say glory and gold were far more important to them than God, but God was still one of the three G's.
What becomes New Spain, the Spanish impose Roman Catholicism, with the forced conversion of indigenous peoples and attempts to eradicate native religions.
Yeah.
The same process occurs further south in Peru and the Portuguese colonies in Brazil. This era also marks the dawn of the transatlantic slave trade.
Yeah, and it's interesting where once upon a time, if you think back to the early days of Christianity, more than 1,000 years before this, Christianity had been a religion of the underclass, of freedmen, of slaves, right? Of people who couldn't find solace anywhere else. In this moment, Christianity becomes a branch of empire, essentially, right? That's what it is. Christianity is one part of this expanding empire, where the Spanish and the Portuguese and these other states are now conquering these territories, conquering them, of course, militarily, but also politically, culturally, religiously. They're imposing this different way of life on these people, and now Christianity is a branch of that imperial project. And in fact, especially in Africa, when we talk about, sure, we'll talk a bit about a lot of missionary work across Africa in the 1800s. Oftentimes, missionaries were the advanced wing of the imperial empire, right? As in, missionaries would show up first, and then the empire, oftentimes the British Empire at that point, would follow, right? So it's interesting to see how Christianity has evolved over time and how these Christian states will be conducting this slave trade of mass scale. I mean, when we talk about, there have been slave trades throughout history. The Atlantic slave trade is of an incredible scale, right?
As Europeans transport enslaved Africans to the Americas as forced labor. Christianity spreads in West Africa as a byproduct of the slave trade.
And of course, at this early point, they're sort of 1500s into early 1600s, there's some of these African slaves, because especially, I mean, I know a lot more about the English colonies in the early 1600s in North America, but early on, there are some laws which essentially identify Christians as non-slaves, and that had usually been the practice, where Christians were non-enslavable, right? And so some of these African slaves then convert to Christianity, and it maybe works for some of them in the beginning, but then pretty quickly new laws are made where they say, okay, that's not what it is, all right? These enslavement is going to now be based more on race rather than religion. And so you see an enslaved population throughout the Americas that practices a lot of different religions, right? I mean, you have some Muslim slaves who were brought over from Africa. You have a lot of people practicing their traditional religions, but you have a lot of Christian enslaved people, and that does not free them from enslavement. They will, in many countries, remain to be enslaved for hundreds and hundreds of years as Christians, fellow Christians, right, to their enslavers.
In the 16th century, Portuguese missionaries have established Christian communities along the coast. Meanwhile, in Europe, there is another major fracture of the Christian religion.
Uh-oh. Here's a big moment, huh? And this is where, you know, it's always a little bit reductive to talk about, like, Christianity or Islam or Judaism as a whole, right? These are massive religious communities incorporating millions and millions of people. Now, for a video like this, we sort of have to, right? So general, it's difficult not to. But, you know, it's worth recognizing the complexity there, where you've already got the split between East and West. You've already got different local practices wherever you look, and now we're getting another split among Western Christians, right? So it becomes even harder to generalize. Though, like I said, for a video like this, you sort of have to generalize when you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of years of history. But just keep in mind, the Christians, like really all religions, they are not united. Almost never have been.
1517, German priest Martin Luther launches a scathing attack on what he considers to be the corrupt practices of the Roman Catholic Church. His actions trigger the Protestant Reformation.
I mean, I don't think Luther could have imagined what his actions would do, you know, because Luther was attacking the church essentially as a reformer, right? And perhaps you could argue that a more flexible institution could have incorporated his critiques or even co-opted them, right? And maybe made some change and adapted over time. But because the church was so inflexible and so stagnant at this point, that hasn't always been the case, but because it was, Luther's critiques lead to a movement that completely breaks off from the Catholic Church, which, like I said, I don't think he really could have imagined in that moment.
Protestant demands for church reform spread rapidly, aided by Gutenberg's new printing press. They are taken up by several European rulers for a mix of political and spiritual motives.
And of course, one of the big changes with the printing press, I mean, the mass distribution of texts, is that some of these guys, these Reformation types, are writing in vernacular, right? So you're German, you're writing in vernacular German rather than High Church Latin, which almost nobody can understand outside of the religious institution you're already within. If you're writing in vernacular, then a lot of people who, you know, most people still couldn't read, but you had fair populations of people who maybe could read their native language, but probably didn't understand Latin, right? And so this made a lot of these ideas and just the Bible itself more accessible, right? Because for a long time, you as an individual Christian, a Catholic, you did not have any access to the Word of God, to the Bible. You couldn't read it, it was in Latin, right? You had access to it through your priest. That's how it worked. But now, a lot of people, for the first time, say the Gutenberg Bible or these other Bibles being printed, they now get to read the Bible itself in their own language. And so they're saying, hey, wait a minute, I'm not sure this is what my priest is telling me, or I'm not sure this really corresponds with the Catholic Church. It allows people to take a more sort of individualistic approach, take a bit of a different approach to religion than they had before.
Protestantism takes hold in Northern Europe. In 1534, English King Henry VIII breaks with Rome and makes himself head of the Church of England.
And I mean, this is really an incredibly important moment, right? England breaking off. Might not have seemed it at the time, right? 1534, England was not an incredibly important state in the European geopolitical order, but just knowing how powerful England and Britain is going to be, how the British Empire conquers the world, this, in retrospect, is a massive moment for Protestantism. The fact that England breaks off means that all of that missionary work and conquering the British do, when they are spreading Christianity, they are spreading, well, Anglicanism, but Protestantism instead of Catholicism, and it could have been different.
Its birth, Protestantism is divided amongst a bewildering number of sects and movements.
Oh yeah.
From Calvinists and Lutherans to Baptists, Anabaptists, Moravian Brethren, Anglicans and Presbyterians. Yet Catholicism remains the dominant branch of Christianity.
For now.
It will now travel to...
I don't know, well, I don't know what, in terms of numbers, how the Protestants and Catholics are competing. You know what I mean? I don't have the stats off the top of my head. But just in terms of global political power, eventually the Protestants will win that battle. Largely through Britain and also the United States.
Southeast Asia, alongside Portuguese and Spanish commercial interests. Missionary Francis Xavier journeys across Asia as a representative of the Portuguese Empire. He lands in Goa in 1542, sails to Portuguese outposts in Indonesia in 1545, and reaches Japan in 1549, where Christianity gains many followers. Christianity is soon the dominant religion. In the early 1600s, Protestants from England and the Netherlands establish colonies along the North American coast. Many are Puritans, seeking religious freedom and the opportunity to build perfect Christian communities.
Yeah, I mean, depends where you look, right? So down in Jamestown, right, down in Virginia, a lot of those guys are still Anglicans, right? That's the branch of Protestantism we're talking about. Up in New England, there tended to be a lot more Puritans. And they talk about the Puritans seeking, sort of toleration for their beliefs. Look, the Puritans, the second part of what they said was more true, or what the Puritans were really seeking was an opportunity to build their own religious communities, right? They were not satisfied existing in England, or they lived in the Netherlands. They did not like being in communities where their religion was not the norm, where they could not control how things went. They wanted their perfect, in fact, very intolerant religious communities. You look at these Puritan communities up in Massachusetts Bay Colony, they really did not like tolerating people of other, not non-Christians, right? Just Christians of other denominations than them, right? They were very intolerant, but they wanted to build these perfect Puritan communities, and that's what they set about doing when they landed in New England.
Missionary John Eliot contacts native tribes in Massachusetts, and by 1663 he prints a Bible in their native language. But attempts at conversion have limited success.
I think you'll see that there was far more conversion among the indigenous people throughout the Spanish Empire. Whereas when we look at North America, I mean, there's some conversion. I mean, there's a fair amount of conversion. I would say it does happen more piecemeal over time. But a big part of that might just be that when we look at the Spanish Empire, the sort of indigenous people there, I mean, they were killed, massacred, treated very badly. But a lot of indigenous people did remain and remain sort of part of this Spanish society, right? That will, we've got Latin America, a lot of the population of Latin American countries today, there's still a high percentage of indigenous people. Whereas in North America, in the United States, and Canada in particular, we look at today, our populations of indigenous people are quite small, right? There's just not that same degree of integration and surviving indigenous communities. There's some, but not to the same degree that you see down in Latin America. And so that means the sort of religious element is quite different as well. The sort of Christianization of North America, largely, I would argue, is through settlement rather than Latin America. And I know we've got some overlap with Mexico, but Latin America, we're talking about both conversion and settlement over time.
Centuries ahead, it is the spread of European settlers that carries Christianity across the North American continent.
Exactly what I just said. I should have just let them speak. They got it.
By the
The age of modern missions. And we're getting into the modern era.
In the high age of European imperialism, Christianity travels to the remaining corners of the globe, alongside European settlers and missionaries. In 1788, Christianity arrives in Australia, alongside the first British penal colony. The London Missionary Society sends its first missionaries to eastern Polynesia in 1797. Missionary work is largely responsible for Christianity's spread across the islands of the South Pacific. Christianity then reaches New Zealand, where missionary Samuel Marsden preaches the first Christian sermon in 1814. Christian missionaries spread their faith across India, among them the Baptist minister William Carey. Known as the father of modern missions, he translates the Bible into 7 Indian languages.
And of course, what we're seeing here is what I mentioned earlier, where at this point, imperialism and Christian ministry, they go hand in hand. Now, in some ways, that had been the case for a long time, especially since 1492, right? Once again, the Spanish conquest of the Americas is God, glory, and gold, right? So there, you have conquest, Christian missionary work, hand in hand. And that's what we have here with the British Empire as well.
Christian missionaries are resented by many Hindus and Muslims. This anger contributes to the Great Indian Uprising against British rule in 1857. This is the age of heroic missionaries, men and women who embark on long and dangerous journeys to save souls in far-off lands. Scottish missionary David Livingstone is perhaps the most famous, the first European
famous, of course, explorer, really.
to reach many parts of Central Africa and to discover and name Victoria Falls. There are others.
And of course, this is, once again, it's all part of this global imperial process where sort of the center of Africa is being mapped out in a way that had not been done before, right? Europeans, they had not known that much about the interior of the continent. Now it's being mapped out, which allows colonization to happen throughout the continent in a way that had not been possible before. And once again, that really happens alongside this missionary work.
Adoniram and Anne Judson, who spent nearly 40 years as missionaries in Burma, and Mary Slessor in Nigeria, who learns the local language, Efik, to preach Christianity. In 1884, American Presbyterians arrive in Korea, bringing both Western medicine and Christianity. The new religion takes off. Today, nearly a third of South Koreans are Christian. In the 1880s, European nations begin the scramble for Africa, a colonial carve-up of the last independent African states. By 1914, they have claimed 90% of the continent, bringing Christianity with them. China had so far proved largely resistant to Christianity, with only around 100,000 converts by the start of the 20th century.
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, we've seen Christianity's been in China for a long time. It was never the majority or even close to it, but to be fair, there was always a fairly prominent sort of minority Christian community that had lasted for a long time, right?
There had even been a violent backlash against the spread of Christianity.
There had.
The Boxer Rebellion, with thousands of Chinese Christians killed.
But I mean, that does show you as well how prominent the idea of Christianity in China was, that it was one of the things that incited this rebellion. Now, of course, as with a lot of these places, you see these uprisings, it's like, wow, they're uprising against Christianity? It's like, well, not exactly. It's the combination between Christianity and imperialism. That's the real problem. But it shows you, how prominent, like I said, Christianity was in China, even if there were not a massive amount of people practicing.
But extensive missionary work after 1900 leads to the construction of thousands of churches and around 4 million Chinese converts by 1945. In the 20th century, the rise of communism proves a major threat to Christianity and other religions.
That's true. I mean, it's interesting. The Soviet Union sort of saw itself as this atheist empire, right? They did not really condone the practice of religion, and that did lead to the suppression of religion, Orthodox Christianity. And I mean, it wasn't just Orthodox Christians in the Soviet Empire, but it mostly was. You had some Catholics as well. Of course, other religions. You saw the repression of religion. Now, that did lead to some genuine decline in religiosity, but in many cases, you saw Christian communities and belief persist for decades throughout the Soviet Union. And of course, after a while, the USSR did back off a little bit. It became a little less harsh against religion, as it did with many things. And so a lot of these Christian communities and other religious communities throughout the empire survived until the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Communist governments in the Soviet Union and Central and Eastern Europe dismantle the church and suppress worship. But Christianity proves the more resilient doctrine. When those governments fall, Christian churches re-emerge with popular support.
And of course, for many of these countries, it's a little different when you're talking about Russia itself. But for a lot of these countries, say a country like Poland, which is a very Catholic country, a lot of people there had always held on to their religion. But during the collapse of the Soviet Union, religion was also a political way of fighting back, right? To reclaim your Catholic religion, to build churches, to, say, invite the Pope, that was a way to sort of strike back against Soviet hegemony, right? Because it's something that they had repressed. And so religion, is used in this very political manner as a way of sort of fighting back against Soviet domination and reestablishing your sort of national identity during and after the collapse of the Soviet Union. In varying degrees depending on the country. I mean, Poland's an example where religion played a big role.
In communist China, there are today many millions of Christians, despite tight state regulation. For nearly 2,000 years, the impact of countless missionaries and colonizers has helped to spread the Christian religion across the globe.
It's a good way of putting it. Missionaries and colonizers.
Today,
sometimes both at once.
there are 2.3 billion Christians.
Wow.
Nearly a third of the world's population, living and worshipping in almost every country on...
How many Muslims are there? Because Christianity most popular, but it's got to be pretty neck and neck with Islam at this point, right? I mean, both religions are monumental.
Earth. For those of the Christian faith, another faith, or none, it has incontrovertibly been the most astonishing historical journey. If you've enjoyed this journey through the history of Christianity, then we highly recommend the channel Religion for Breakfast. Religion for Breakfast is dedicated to exploring humanity's beliefs and rituals throughout history. Their latest video delves into the fascinating Coptic Orthodox Church, tracing its origins in the 1st century AD, explaining its theology, and uncovering the lives of the Coptic community.
Yeah, it's one of those fascinating, long-standing religious movements. I believe we're heading to an ad. Here, let's see.
Even better, the Nebula Lifetime plan offers lifetime existing nebula.
There you go. There's their link. Want to get that in, right? We do our ethical reactions here. You can go check out their video, linked down below. Show them some support. I'm aware, I just saw the pop-up, that they also did a video on the spread of Islam, right? So we'll do that one at some point as well. Some really fascinating stuff. Definitely a fascinating story. Yeah, I enjoyed this one. Like I said, a bit different than their usual video. Their videos, you know, they typically are focused more on a particular topic or time period. This is sort of a general explainer video, I would say, but definitely an interesting one. I mean, gave us an opportunity to talk about a lot of things over time. Everything from the Roman Empire to the British conquest of Africa, right? So really ranging time and space, some fascinating history. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, you can leave a like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Hope you're all having a fantastic day today, and I'll see you all again next time. Goodbye.